The Hazaras have been subjected to a chain of systematic and targeted attacks for persecution and genocide based on three major reasons. Firstly, the Hazaras have been targeted by virtue of our distinct ethnic origin and ethnic identity as a Hazara. As we have Turco-Mongolian heritage and have distinct Asiatic features, which sets us apart from the rest of the population inside the country. There is a Taliban saying about our people which goes that Tajiks, which is the other ethnic groups, the other minority ethnic groups within Afghanistan, that Tajiks should go to Tajikistan, which is a neighboring country bordering Afghanistan. Uzbek should go to Uzbekistan, which is another neighboring country. And Hazaras should go to Goristan. Goristan means cemetery. Secondly, the Hazaras have been targeted based on our perceived religion. As I mentioned, the Hazaras are predominantly Shia Muslims within a broader Sunni Muslim majority in Afghanistan. Therefore, the Hazaras are despised based on being Shia, predominantly Shia Muslims, by the Sunni majority population in Afghanistan. But it is also worth noting that the Hazaras are not a homogeneous group, that we have atheist Hazaras, we have secular Hazaras, we have Sunni as well as Ismaili, other Hazara sects. And thirdly, and more recently, the Hazaras have been targeted based on our hard-earned success in education, in sports, and in politics, as well as our progressive and democratic values. In particular, Hazara culture promotes liberalism, progressiveness, progressive thinking, and our community has expanded and embraced in educational opportunities in recent years. In particular, these cultural liberal distinctions are at odds with the extremist Sunni conservative views within the wider context in Afghanistan, particularly with that of the Taliban. For over a century, I mentioned, the Hazaras have been victims of genocide in Afghanistan. This started in the late 19th century, particularly in 1892, when the king of Afghanistan at the time, called Abdurrahman, sought to bring the Hazara people under his control in what is called the land of the Hazaras, Hazarajat today. He waged a brutal war against our people, which resulted in bloody massacres, looting and pillaging of our homes and ancestral lands, enslavement of our women and children, and the transfer of our lands to Pashtun tribes, which is what makes up majority of the Taliban ethnic group today. It is estimated by historians that the Hazara people were inflicted to genocide, and some 62% of our population was destroyed by the king at the time. Over the following decades, the Hazaras continued to face repression, discrimination, as well as socioeconomic marginalization in the early 20th century. Many Hazaras were forced to conceal their identities in order to obtain state identification cards. Hazaras were barred from receiving education, particularly higher education, and being able to enter institutional level jobs and employment. Until the 1970s, for example, the Hazaras were not able to access higher education, which has led and resulted in intergenerational discrimination against Hazaras, particularly Hazara women not being able to access education. As I mentioned, when the Taliban first came to power in the late 1990s, there were at least 9 genocidal massacres in that period of time alone. And in particular, in 1998, in a matter of just few days alone, they killed thousands of Hazaras in northern Afghanistan, in Mazar-e-Sharif, particularly going and hunting down people who were Hazaras and killing them in very brutal manners. From 2002 onwards, there has been at least 300 targeted attacks, which are considered genocidal in their nature because of the way that these attacks have taken place in educational centers, in places of worship, maternity hospitals, sporting facilities, public gatherings, and wedding halls, just to name a few. And the nature of these attacks have been systematic in the sense that the perpetrators of these attacks, primarily the Taliban, have gone into these places and specifically targeted the Hazara people based on their identity as a Hazara. So if I can just give an example of public transport during the last 20 years in Afghanistan, when these attacks did take place in buses, for example, traveling from one province to another, the perpetrators would go into these public transports and ask for Hazara victims. So they would get the Hazaras to stand up and then remove them from the bus, take them outside and eventually kill them and let the rest of the travelers to move on from their journey. And the bodies of the Hazara victims would be discovered the next time another bus of travelers would cross the sort of pathway. So that's the nature of these attacks, in particular the last 20 years, which was very systematic, which is very targeted, and fits within the definition of genocide, as mentioned, which is the, in whole or in part, the targeted nature of killings of people based on ethnic or religious identity.